Hello, this time on Sitrep, a remarkable warning from the head of the Royal Navy that the senior service is vulnerable to promoting toxic leaders. So what's wrong with the system and how can it be fixed? Tom Sharpe will draw on his 27 years of Navy experience to explain. We'll also talk about the Royal Navy's biggest deployment for decades. The carrier strike group covered more than 40,000 miles, but what has it achieved? And as Germany's president visits the UK, one of Britain's former defence chiefs tells us why he thinks our countries should be sharing out lead roles in the defending of Europe.
5 years' time, Germany will be the preeminent land power in Europe, bar none. And that's an extraordinary thought.
Defence Explained.
We went to the Indo-Pacific to show our support for rules-based international order. Doing that as an international carrier strike group, in my mind, really legitimises why we went there and what we did.
This is Sitrep with Kate Gerbeau.
Well, Mike is out this week, but we're always happy to welcome Tom Sharpe, and we get him for the whole of this week's Sitrep. Tom, great to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
It was 27 years that you served in the Royal Navy, as I said, and these days, as well as talking to us, you write regularly for The Telegraph and work as a communications consultant. Did you ever miss being on board a ship, though, in uniform?
I had a fantastic time in the Navy. It was a tremendous adventure, professionally, occasionally very challenging, and sometimes pretty hairy. I didn't miss it for 1 second. I left for complex and varied reasons, all of which were sound, all of which have withstood the test of time. So I'm quite happy looking back in from my comfortable armchair. I loved it, but I don't miss it.
Yeah, and we want to draw on your experience in the Royal Navy to better understand what the First Sea Lord, General Sir Gwyn Jenkins, said a few days ago about his concerns for the way decisions are taken on leadership positions. Rather than me paraphrasing it, I think it's probably worth briefly hearing what he did say and how it was said.
I have a real issue with the way that we assess our leaders at the moment. I think we are very subjective in our leadership assessment tools. It's very top-down. How your superior feels about the way you present yourself largely dictates how you get reported upon. It makes us very vulnerable to promoting toxic leaders if we're not careful, who by their nature are very persuasive up, even while they're damaging below.
Tom, really interesting, isn't it? A measured tone, but the phrase vulnerable to toxic leadership is quite stark.
It is, and I would say two things at the top here. The first is that toxicity or narcissism or bullying or whatever you want to call it is a very difficult subject to tackle. I'm not entirely sure why, but it is. We see it in politics, we see it across industry, we see it everywhere. For some reason, people find it difficult to talk about. So the First Sea Lord even mentioning it is in my view is good leadership in its own right. He's got this thing out there. You know, he's discussed something that would have made previous people slightly nervous to even mention. So that's the first point I'd make. The second point I'd make as we go into this conversation is it's very easy to get locked into a doom loop and imagine that somehow the system's rotten and that we're constantly selecting poor leaders or bullies or whatever. I would refute that, and that's not what he was saying.
No.
Warning against the fact that most of the time we select pretty good leaders to do pretty good jobs in sometimes exceptional circumstances. Periodically, absolute, diamonds pop up in the most horrific conditions, and then sometimes you get bad ones as well. And my experience in the Navy, across defence, and now in the private sector, we're not an outlier. There's no sort of glamorous military leadership model that's perfect. Of course there isn't. The base product is the same as any other company. So, like I said, I think most of the time it's okay, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing better, and he's highlighted that.
So what did you think when we heard him say that?
Well, he's exactly right about the way we report on our leaders. And I'm going to stick with officers here. There are similarities with the ratings, but with the officers that he's describing, the way they're pulled through the system, there are vulnerabilities. I mean, the first of which is that it's bottom fed. It's a complex hierarchy, it's a pyramid, and it all comes in at the bottom. So your product is what you get on the basis of an interview that is now conducted online. He's going to reverse that decision and go back to in-person interviews, which is excellent news. It's incomprehensible that they ever went the other way. Well, they did it to save money. So you get the right person in through the door, you then train them in a certain way. And actually, of course, the way we train people from a very early age is quite hierarchical. It's quite dictatorial. You're training for the last 10 yards, as the army would call it, on the battlefield. Please and thank you is not part of it. Emotional, sort of empathy is not really part of it at the early stages of your training. So you can see why you're setting the conditions early on for this quite aggressive leadership model. And then as you get to your mid-ranking, sort of lower command jobs, it becomes very quickly very competitive. And you can only get paid more by getting promoted, and you're in a competition now, and it's fierce.
So from what you're saying, you think he's right in what he said?
Yeah, I do. There are vulnerabilities there. And it all hinges on the reporting system, which he alluded to. But the way you are written up is really, really poor. I said the system's not broken, and it isn't. But that reporting system probably is. It's not honest. It requires far too much agility from the people writing it, who all have to align. It uses sort of coded language. You can't say they're a bully. You have to say they're a robust leader. It really lacks the capacity to accurately describe the people in your charge.
So how do you fix it? Is it about the way you describe things? What can be done?
There's a few things here. Look, in terms of improving the way we select and promote leaders. The first one is education. We obviously, this underpins all of this, and I think we could spend a little bit more time during service careers educating people the right way to do things, and educating out these habits as they start to develop in their sort of early to mid careers. I think that's vital. The way we judge people, the way we assess them against various criteria. For an example, I was assessed on my leadership in command of a frigate. So I had 220 people on board. I was assessed by someone I'd met for one day in the year, and my second reporting officer I'd never met. And they never thought to ask the 220 people who knew me intimately so that can't be right. That makes us vulnerable to the kiss up, kick down. He didn't say those exact words, but that's what he was talking about.
Did they miss things about you? Do you think because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they wrote about someone else because it was really good. I thought I've got the wrong. They've written this is the wrong report. But I mean, that's bad in its own way, right? Whilst it suited me, it worked for me. It's also not right. It wasn't an accurate reflection of me. So we need some kind of 360 system. Which industry, of course, adopts, across the board. The military has an aversion to it because there's a fear that it will then lead to insubordination one way or popularity chasing the other. Well, frankly, we need to get over that. We need to find a way of assessing people better than what one reporting officer thinks, whether he likes them or not. We need to do better than that. I think that's for sure.
And Tom, we've had quite a few comments online since BFBS Forces News first posted this, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on some of them. If I can just read them out. On X, Tony James says, it takes a Royal Marines officer to identify what's been happening in the Navy for years. What are your thoughts on that? Well,
I mean, yes, I think the fresh pair of eyes on this, if that's what he's bringing, I think it's more a function of him than the colour of his uniform, frankly. I think he sees things very differently. Early reports are extremely, extremely good. You have to run pretty fast to keep up. But that itself is a good thing. So I think the way he's tackling this and some other aspects of his leadership at early days it's more him than the fact that he happens to be a Royal Marine.
I suppose you could argue it the other way as well, though, that some people might say because he's a Royal Marine, he doesn't get the Royal Navy at large.
No, I wouldn't say that. Leadership is leadership. Right. If you're good enough, you're good enough. There are nuances within the naval service, but then he has naval officers right next to him who can tackle that. So this is why I never really squealed when the idea of a Royal Marine First Sea Lord was mooted, because I just think if you're the right person, within reason, clearly, you're not good. I don't think we should be bringing in CEOs from industry straight into the top of the shop. I don't think that's appropriate. They wouldn't reflect the ethos and traditions of the service, but he can clearly do that after years of service.
We'll go through a couple more comments in a moment, but it's also interesting to note that he was speaking to an audience made up of senior non-commissioned officers, Royal Navy captains and Royal Marine colonels, and I think it was a Q&A session rather than a speech.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, he's targeting the right level. If you're to address this, if we're talking about education, which is pillar one in how to reform this, then that's what he's doing there. and he's hitting the right layer, because that's where you weed. That's in theory where you can weed these behaviours out or educate them to improve. When it gets really poor is when they burst through that level at a young age, because they're invariably bright. I'm talking about narcissists here. They're very bright. They're very charming, which is why they get away with those behaviours, and they can burst through at an early age because they deliver results. The problem is those results are very rarely sustainable, and in a ship environment, you can cause havoc in your 18 months in command, leave an absolute trail of devastation, get a glowing report, move on and up. The wreckage is behind you, but you don't care. And besides, you've got a report that says you're exceptional. So why would you then moderate your behavior going forward? And it's those people who then go to high rank that can cause absolute carnage. So I think he's essentially sort of setting the conditions at that level, the senior NCO and the colonel, half colonel level, commander level, to say this is where we need to assess better, choose better, and sometimes behave better.
That is a really interesting analysis. Let's just get some more online comments then, Tom. Peter Morris on YouTube says, I was an engineering officer in the RAF and saw numerous people get promoted because of better subjective traits than me. Is this really unique to the Royal Navy?
No, it's not. It's not unique to any business on the planet. If you can find me a leadership hierarchy that promotes, to perfection, then please let me know. Of course, there are flaws. And I would say, not being too cynical, but it's very easy to aggregate the bad ones and group them up, and they tend to be the ones that appear in the comments to articles like this. And most people just go, yeah, that boss in 2008 was an absolute monster, and you park it and you move on. But if you aggregate all these into one sort of blob, then it can look much worse than it actually is.
Here's another one from a veteran on YouTube who says he's not wrong about military worship thy boss, supposed meritocracy, but equally the opposite end, civvy team surveys leads you to team leaders who can't say no to their subordinates.
Well, that's the popularity chasing issue. That's one of the big fears. If you introduce a more sort of two-way system, that you encourage that. I'm not totally convinced by that. The sailors I work with, and there are thousands, can spot someone chasing popularity a mile off, and they'll like it for about a month, and then very quickly they'll either get tired of it, or the overriding question anyway is, can this person fight? Can this who's in charge of me? If we go to war, are we going to be better off without them or with them? And that sort of supersedes this popularity business, and so I think that's a slightly over-egged fear in this process.
Here's a really interesting one from X. It's Harry Duckworth who says, this is what happens when you have a time-based promotion system.
Yeah, that's true. Adding to this pyramid is everything is timed back from the top. And there's a sort of mythical requirement to be selectable for the Chief of Defence Staff before your 60th birthday. And everything cascades down from that. So if you're a warfare officer and you want to make it to high rank and you're still a commander at sort of 40, then you probably missed that boat. So there is an ageism part to this. I know people who were selected to the rank of commander but didn't get command of a ship because they were deemed to be slightly too old. So yeah, I think we need to fix that. We need to be more comfortable with fast tracking and agility. But that has an effect on retention, of course. If you can spot the person who's being absolutely shot through the system, then that could be demoralizing for you, particularly if you don't rate them. They've got the wrong person. Yeah. It's a very fine balance. Again, previous First Sea Lords have dipped right into the system and extracted people. That's risky. I mean, I know I said the reporting system's not brilliant, but that means you're just pulling out invariably people who look and sound a bit like you. That's not right either. So it's a very fine system. And like I say, it's not completely out of kilter right now, but it could still be improved.
And what do you think the impact of this is all going to be from bottom to top in the Royal Navy?
I think if we can weed out, look, all we need to do here is make it very clear that empathy, that EQ is as important as IQ. So the ability to lead in a way that provides sustainable excellence is as important as sort of immediate warfighting excellence. There's no point in preparing for the last 10 yards if you wreck yourself in the first 990, because you'll get there in the wrong order. So we have to just broaden it out slightly and recognize that history teaches us some poor lessons in this regard, because it often picks out exceptional leaders in exceptional wartime circumstances and glorifies the way they did their business in a way that it's sort of in a modern office environment, ashore, it wouldn't be sustainable. So I just think we need to be a bit more nuanced and reflect better on the people that are leading us and that we're reporting on, and then educate and assess them, more accurately over time. And then final point, of course, in all of this, honesty. The bullies I was in a ship where the captain got sacked for bullying. It was that bad. And it was horrific. And there are a couple of people who bear the scar tissue to this day. What that revealed was a lack of honesty in the people reporting on him. For the previous 5 to 6 years, they all abrogated their moral responsibility to identify the characteristics of this person that they knew was wrong, delivering results, but they overlooked the manner in which they were being delivered. And they didn't say it because they were scared to. So, at the top and the bottom of this, we need a bit of moral fiber here as well to write down in black and white on this slightly wonky report when they display characteristics that make them unfit for senior command.
Well, we'll talk more about the Royal Navy in a bit, because a big chunk of it has just arrived home after travelling halfway round the world and back. But before that, we want to talk about Germany. The finest in British military ceremony has been on show for a state visit by Germany's president, the first of its kind since the 1990s. While the role held by Frank-Walter Steinmeier is in many ways ceremonial, these visits are very much about building important relationships and strengthening ties. And right now, it is defence ties that are top of the UK and Germany's shared list. And so we welcome Marina Henke, who joins us from Berlin, where she's director of the Centre for International Security and Professor of International Relations at the Hertie School. Marina, great to see you on Sitrep again. Thanks for joining us. So Germany has radically stepped up its defence spending since the invasion of Ukraine. What has that delivered so far in terms of military capability, though?
So the big change really came this year with the election of the new Chancellor, Merz. And in the end, what we see so far is the political will. There has been a decision to increase German defense spending to 3.5% of German GDP, and that would involve 158 billion euros per year. And that is quite a steep increase. So Germany so far has been around the 60 billion per year in annual spending. As you can see here, it's almost 100 billion more. There's a lot of talk on what this should be spent on, and the plans have been discussed in the German parliament. But so far, I think the real results of the capabilities, it's kind of like too soon to tell what will end up. But certainly that it has been a drastic change compared to all the previous governments ever since German reunification in 1990.
Indeed. And Marina, a year ago, the Trinity House Defence Cooperation Agreement between the UK and Germany was signed, leading to the Kensington Treaty this summer. How does that tie us together on defence? What's the practical reality of it?
So probably the most important part is a mutual defense agreement, right? So the UK says even if NATO no longer exists, it will come to our assistance, and that's very substantive. Germany has signed roughly about 20 of these bilateral agreements, but the UK one is by far the most profound and the most significant, especially when it comes to mutual defense.
And ahead of this visit, one of the architects of the UK's recent defence review, General Sir Richard Barrons, called for the UK and Germany to combine their strengths to address weaknesses in European security. In an analysis for Chatham House, he argues that the UK has a good transformative plan, but without the money to deliver quickly, while Germany doesn't have the same level of thinking, but is delivering mass very rapidly.
We are looking at an outcome now where 5 years' time, Germany will be the preeminent land power in Europe, bar none. I think we should recognise the coming ascendancy of Germany and welcome it. This is a really powerful move for the security and the defence of Europe. But we should also recognise that the German military can be quite introvert. They tend to look at the territorial integrity of Germany. That is actually their job. And I think there's a great deal that the UK can do to take the content of the SDR, the transformative narrative, and in partnership with Germany, to the great benefit of both countries, see if there is a way forward where this vast amount of German money is spent in a way that is more transformative, but also helps the UK get over the financial challenges it has in the next few years because they work in a more collaborative manner.
And what stands in the way of us doing this? Because we both signed the Trinity House Defence Cooperation Agreement a year ago.
So, first of all, we are talking about sovereign money and the way Germany spends its money, heavily controlled, as it should be, by the German Parliament. And we are also in the UK, not in the European Union. So there are some sovereign and some institutional barriers to this. My view is they can be overcome through the mechanism of something like the Trinity House partnership. And there are also already some projects in that partnership, for example, around very long-range precision fires, long-range missiles. So there is something to work with there. But what it really requires is the leadership of the two countries, political and military, to come together and to see, where there are deals to be done that blend the UK narrative, or at least explaining it better, with the German ability to get things done financially.
And you mentioned one example of what we're doing there bilaterally. Is that it? How much are we actually doing? So there are programs in being, such as the Boxer program for the Army, where essentially a family of vehicles will be led by German industry, and some manufacture will happen in the UK. But I think there are some bigger plays here. So for both countries, the future is that their armies, navies and air forces become a much more effective mix of crewed platform ships, tanks, aircraft, with uncrewed, which is what a drone is, but increasingly autonomous platforms. And I think here the genius that Germany has for engineering and the thought leadership that the UK is exercising ought to come together, even if Germany gets the equipment first and the UK then gets the same thing, but a bit later. And why go one-to-one with Germany rather than through NATO?
So Germany and the UK, I think, are naturally aligned in many ways. And we understand, Germany has a major project for its next combat air system with France. That seems to be in some trouble. But NATO doesn't really spend any money as NATO. These are the sovereign nations. But I would absolutely agree that if Germany and the UK can find a way forward where they're much more collaborative in defence procurement, then I think many other NATO partners would want to be part of that. They would see the virtue in military terms and in economies of scale.
And if you compare our agreement with Germany to our bilateral defence agreements with France, those have been around a lot longer, so they run a lot deeper, presumably.
So I'm not sure that is so. I mean, the history of the Lancaster House agreement with France has been a bit mixed. There's been some very effective collaborative training and concept development. There has been relatively modest success in the equipment field, and one of the reasons for that is, frankly, neither the UK nor France have anything like the financial muscle you only get in Europe, really, from Germany, and that makes the arrangement very different.
And as the US attention is drawn away from Europe, the US ambassador to NATO has suggested a top German officer could eventually take on the Supreme Allied Commander role. Is Germany replacing the UK as the European big hitter in NATO?
So I think the debate's going to become more complicated. I think we can be sure that Germany will have the leading European army in NATO within 5 years if it spends the money that it plans to spend and it recruits the people it intends to recruit. That will still mean that the UK has an important continental role, in my view, with the Strategic Reserve Corps. I think that's important to NATO, and it's very important to UK defence and security. But the UK will also remain, I think, ahead of Germany in the maritime environment, with particularly the nuclear deterrent and the anti-submarine warfare capability that the Royal Navy has. And the Air Force has a much greater span of capability right now than the German Air Force. So I think there'll be a blend. But I think the heart of your question is, if we look down the track 10 to 15 years, and we know the US is going to do a lot less for Europe, is there going to be a case for Germany, and it would be Germany, to take on the role of the Supreme Allied Commander Europe in some much more European-focused NATO, and I think that undoubtedly that moment will come.
And should we be concerned about waning British defence influence, or welcome the fact the burden is being shared?
So I think we should think both of those thoughts. They're not mutually exclusive. So I think in the world we live in, particularly with the UK no longer in the European Union, but still a really important member of NATO, it's in the UK's best interest to be a leading player in Europe, knowing that America will do less. But that does not in any way diminish or exclude the thought that Germany has, as the major economy in Europe, has a huge role to play. It hasn't really been playing it. Now it is going to, and we should welcome that and work very collaboratively with it. And I think with the UK doing better and the Germany doing more in the way that it's intended, then I think the objective, which will be Europe settling its own security, particularly in terms of a difficult conversation with Russia without so much US help, can be achieved at reasonable cost.
General Sir Richard Barrons, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Marina, what do you make of General Barron's ideas there? Is there scope for the UK and Germany to carve up leading roles, as it were, in defence of Europe?
Absolutely. And I think what I would like to add is that German strategic thinking and also the infrastructure that allows for strategic thought has been dormant for 30 years. Germany was literally not involved in the planning of operations, for example, in Afghanistan or in Kosovo. It was always took a back seat. And so the UK today has a huge advantage when it comes to this side of how should actually these forces be employed? How should we think through about deterring Russia? And, even if he proposes that Germany should take on the lead, I think it will take at least a decade for a new generation of strategic thinkers to come up in the German system and then be fully operational. It's true, there is the money, and soon I think there will be the capabilities, but any army is only as good as the strategy it implements. And I think this is actually the big weakness where we need to learn and rely on the UK, which just has so much greater experience on that front.
Tom, you were nodding away there while Marina was talking. Do you think Germany has woken up from strategic dormancy?
Well, that I don't know. I mean, it does look like it, doesn't it? And certainly from a spending perspective, it's quite dramatic. I mean, the roadmap is not dissimilar to ours. It's a bit faster. The difference is it's actually happening. They are actually spending this money now and converting now, whereas we're just constantly pretending we are and talking about it. So it's very interesting to watch. I would echo what the General said about Germany's slightly sort of introverted nature. Certainly my interactions with them over the years, particularly at sea, but on staff colleges and in planning cells around the world, reflects that. I think it's too early to say if this is them re-emerging as a sort of globally confident military player, but I hope they do, and I hope we can help them along that way. If that doesn't sound slightly patronizing, I think we do have dissimilar skills in that regard, and I think a bilateral collaboration at the start of this to lean on each other's strengths as we do so is really, really important.
Tom, the Royal Navy is already seen by many as a leading maritime power in Europe. It's already got its hands very full, though, if it were to trade land versus maritime responsibilities.
Can I start by saying I never really liked that conversation. I never liked the way it's framed, mainly because it's so often used as an excuse to spend less on one or the other. It's not a strict conversation about what we actually need as either a UK defence unit or a combined one with, let's say, Germany. These things are, in my view, are symbiotic. You can't trade air versus maritime versus land. You've got the only people who will ever do that are our treasuries, and we shouldn't encourage that conversation. So
let me phrase it differently then, or pose the question as: is there more scope then for German and Royal Navies to work together to better achieve more than the sum of their parts?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if you look at the makeup of the German Navy now, it's quite introverted, actually, to use that expression again. It's quite coastal, barring about 3 frigates. They're not really what we would call a blue water navy. Their diesel electric submarines are outstanding. I've been up against them, and they're like ghosts. So they run their ships very well, but they've always been, dare I say it, slightly hollow. I mean, that is, dare I say it, coming from the UK right now. Perhaps we'll come on to that later, but we can definitely share this business. And if we're, we always look as one of our core roles as the Green Alliance and UK Gap, and the heading in of the Russian submarine threat in the North Atlantic, and not in the North Atlantic, stopping it from getting to the North Atlantic, keeping it northeast of the Green Alliance UK Gap. Us and Germany can work absolutely hand in glove with the Norwegians. The Germans are buying the P-8 aircraft. These are all key sort of relationships that we need to now develop.
And Marina, how much has the mindset changed in Germany in the last few years?
I think what you need to understand is you have two different sets of segments of society that are very supportive now of this rearmament program. On the one hand, there's the segment of society that has truly understood that Russia is a revisionist state and it needs to be deterred. But then there's a second segment of society that sees the German industry in big, big trouble. That's the car industry, that's the chemical industry, that's the steel industry. And so I think you cannot fully understand the German Zeitenwende if you don't understand that there's also this industrial policy component. But these two segments, so those who want to revive the German economy via spending on defense, and those who sincerely want to deter Russia, both segments are strong enough to really carry this forward. And that's why I think it will happen. All of this is not just, in the heat of the moment, but it does have a very important economic component as well.
Marina, one of the biggest challenges across NATO has been ramping up defence industry. You can throw all the money you like, but if there's not the capacity to make stuff, does Germany have any lessons for the UK on that, or is it struggling?
So when you look at some of the plans that the Bundeswehr has published on what they actually want to procure, you see that there's a very heavy focus on fighting vehicles. And here, literally what we see is the German car manufacturers, so your BMW, Mercedes, Volkswagen, that some of the production plants are now transformed to be able to be used by Rheinmetall and other German defense manufacturing firms that can, to a large degree, tap into these resources and also recruit those people who were laid off in the automobile industry. So I think this shift really happens. But of course, the big question is, to deter Russia and be a strong fighting force, does it really just need these fighting vehicles, right? And I would say, obviously not. You need to have other capabilities. You need to have drones. You need to have sensors. You need to have deep strike capabilities. And this is where my worries lie these days, right? That Germany in the next 5 years will have a formidable fighting vehicle capability, but not in those other areas where Europe is weak and still relies mostly on the United States. And here, I think it really requires an effort and political will, and also cooperation with the UK, with other nations, to bring in these other capabilities and technologies that Germany right now doesn't have.
Marina Hanke, it's been great to see you on Sitrep. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Lovely being with you.
OK, let's finish by talking about what has been arguably the UK's most significant military deployment of the year. The HMS Prince of Wales-led carrier strike group set sail with more than 2,000 British personnel back in April. They are now finally home, and our editor, he likes numbers, so he's given me a list. More than 40,000 nautical miles covered. That's equivalent to 1.5 times around the world. Ships visited 12 different countries and interacted with 30 nations, and more than 2,500 aircraft sorties were flown. And in the process, HMS Prince of Wales has achieved full operating capability. Do you want to add any statistics to that, Tom, at all?
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. It's immense.
So what does that mean, this achieving full operating capability, given that the carrier was already able to lead this strike group? What can that ship and her company do now that they couldn't do before?
Can I come back to the jets and the full operating capability? Because it's a very important part of this, but it's, in my view, quite a small part. I think the things that this deployment did, and by the way, I think it's possible to be proud of it and also worried by it at the same time. I think which I am, I think these thoughts can coexist. It did achieve some extraordinary things, the deployment, and I think some of the more important ones are the ones that don't really get mentioned. The time we got around the table with the US and we discussed carrier placement. So they wanted to release the Nimitz from the Pacific Command to head to the Red Sea early on in the deployment. That essentially left PACOM with no carriers. And we said, well, so there was a really high level conversation about carrier work. That's sort of priceless. No one ever sees it or even frankly cares. But these are the sort of mill to mill, perhaps even sort of policy level discussions that I think are really important. The fact that they were in the South China Sea and able to do freedom of navigation operations there, again, strategically, that's vital. Freedom of navigation is being challenged everywhere. And we were able to do our part briefly, and it's only once every 4 years if you don't include the patrol ships that are there all the time. But in large scale, we were able to contribute. I think that's really important. And then if you package up what that whole group can do in terms of the Russia piece and the sort of northern flank, that is now a well worked up task group that is held at readiness through NATO.
Okay.
To tackle that. So I think holistically the deployment achieved, three pretty major things and did them really well.
And what about the bit where you're concerned?
Yeah, it's the fragility of it. So we've done all those things, but it's wafer thin. There's nothing underpinning it. And I mean that across almost the entire piece. The fact that we couldn't manage an operational nuclear powered submarine, attack submarine, to go with that group, to me is unforgivable. It's absolute carrier strike basics that you have a nuclear attack submarine with that group. We couldn't do it. And meanwhile, we're constantly saying we're meeting all our operational tasking. Well, no, we're not. Other things, the lack of weapon systems on the Queen Elizabeth herself, on Prince of Wales, the QE class. This is all predicated. We elected not to put closer weapons on our carriers on the basis of layered defence. And that's a good principle in maritime terms, but those layers are looking very thin. We got a 120 Type 23 frigate and one Type 45 destroyer to go pretty much the whole way around, which is commendable, but that's it. That left the cupboard in the UK almost entirely bare. And then we didn't get stuck at the bottom of the Red Sea. I know the Foreign Office have real issues with that. They see a whole load of risk where mariners perhaps do not. So there are some real downsides to this, some real sort of pause for thought moments. And I think perhaps now that they're back, and all those cycles that we had to break to achieve those extraordinary things, let's go back to the jets. So getting 24 jets on board to achieve full operating capability. We had to break a number of piggy banks to achieve that, to get that fairly thin metric. I mean, it is pretty thin. Again, if you look at the surrounds of our F-35 and even the F-35 itself and its weapons, this is perilously thin. So we broke some piggy banks to achieve it. Excellent, very proud, and what an effort. That would have cohered that whole thing. And yet, what state is that in now, and how long will it take them to recover and reset the switches?
So, if this is about deterrence and the world sees that, has it helped deterrence?
Yeah, I think it has just. I mean, because there is still a break glass in the event of war caveat here. I'm talking about peacetime resets now. The ships are back. Everyone wants to go home for Christmas, see their families. I mean, 7.5 months away. Just please lock that one away, because most people don't have to do that. And you can't dismiss that easily. That is a big ask of 4,500 people. So they reset. The jets return back to home plate. The ships go back to their home port. Everyone takes a well-earned break, and now we need to re-establish the operating, sort of sustainable operating pattern. But that is peacetime thinking. If we sail that ship tomorrow to go and fight them, then we could do so. We would have to tear up a few rule books, but that's the nature of going to war. So I think holistically, the idea that we can operate and sustain a global task group in this way from a deterrence posture is good. That is eroded slightly by the fact it's as thin as I've described, but not entirely.
Tom, it's been really great having you on Sitrep today. Are you going to be getting on board a Royal Navy ship anytime soon, or is it all behind you?
I quite like to talk about the communications of this. So in terms of getting back on a Navy warship, I have offered myself up on a couple of occasions, and that offer has been either ignored or politely declined. And this is, I think, a problem we have right now. It came to light when the ship was on its way back. where the French were writing up the deployment, the US were writing up the deployment. We had journalists, a very select group of journalists who were not allowed on board, but not allowed to talk to sailors. We have to adjust our control metric, not weapons free. I'm not talking about going but if someone who served for that length of time, who is endlessly trying to justify the task group concept and the carriers against some pretty fierce opposition, and it's not a battle I'm winning, incidentally, certainly not in the pages of the Telegraph, asks to go and visit to report back what's happening, you should probably consider that. And I don't just mean me, I mean the whole system. Yeah. It's trying to control, it's trying to regulate, it's very centralized. Of course, it's coming from number 10, and they're trying to control the narrative. And it's, on the other hand, we're trying to sell this product to people who don't believe in it.
Thank you so much for joining us on Sitrep today. Always good to speak to you. And that is all for now. I will be reunited with Professor Michael Clark for another Sitrep next Thursday. Don't forget, you can always catch up with past programmes you might have missed online at bfbs.com/sitrep, the BFBS Forces News YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, from me, Kate Gerbeau, thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.